Ever wondered which countries Americans can't visit anymore in 2025? In this video, we reveal the top 10 countries that have either banned U.S. travelers or have severe travel restrictions due to political tensions, safety risks, or diplomatic disputes. From North Korea's total ban to Russia's rising hostility, these nations are off limits to most American travelers this year. Buckle up as we unpack the complex situations that have led to these travel bans. Let's dive in and see why these places are no-go zones for Americans. First up, we have North Korea, a country that's about as easy to get into as a bank vault, if that bank vault was guarded by heavily armed soldiers. The U.S. State Department has issued a total ban on American citizens traveling to North Korea. It's not exactly a hotbed of karaoke bars and all-inclusive resorts. The political tension between the U.S. and North Korea is thicker than a bowl of kimchi stew. Decades of mistrust and nuclear threats have made it a no-go zone for Americans. Let's move on to the next country on our list. Next on our list is Russia, a country that's gone from Cold War rival to, well, let's just say things are a bit frosty right now. While Russia hasn't outright banned American travelers, they've made it about as welcoming as a Siberian winter. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory for Russia, which is their highest level of caution, basically screaming, "Don't go there." Russia's invasion of Ukraine has put a serious damper on their relationship with the West, and the U.S. is no exception. This heightened tension has made travel to Russia incredibly difficult and potentially dangerous for Americans. So, unless you're fluent in Russian, have a black belt in diplomacy, and a really good lawyer on speed dial, it's best to postpone that trip to Moscow for now. Let's see which country is next. Let's move on to Iran, a country with a rich history and beautiful landscapes. Its diplomatic relationship with the U.S. is as stable as a Jenga tower on a roller coaster. The U.S. travel ban on Iran has been in place for decades. This tension dates back to the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis. Attempts to thaw relations have melted faster than ice cream in Death Valley. Admire Iran's Persian carpets and ancient ruins from a safe distance. On to the next country. Syria, where holiday plans go to crumble. Our next destination is Syria, a country that's sadly become synonymous with conflict and devastation. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, urging Americans to avoid all travel to Syria, and for tragically obvious reasons. Syria has been ravaged by a brutal civil war for over a decade, a conflict so complex and heartbreaking that it would make even the most seasoned diplomat want to crawl into a hole and sob quietly. The U.S. government warns of the risk of kidnapping, detention, injury, or death, which, let's be honest, are not exactly the souvenirs you want to bring back from your vacation. Even journalists and aid workers who are usually drawn to these kinds of hotspots are strongly advised to stay away. So, unless you have a death wish or a superhero complex, Syria is a destination best left to the history books. Let's move on to our next country. Venezuela. Beauty and turmoil collide. Up next we have Venezuela, a country that's home to breathtaking natural beauty, vibrant culture, and a political situation that's about as stable as a unicycle on a tightrope. The U.S. and Venezuela have had a tumultuous relationship for years, with diplomatic ties severed and travel restrictions in place. Venezuela has been grappling with a severe economic and political crisis, with hyperinflation, food shortages, and political instability plaguing the nation. The U.S. government has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, urging Americans to avoid all travel to Venezuela due to the risk of crime, civil unrest, and arbitrary detention. The Venezuelan government has been known to target Americans, accusing them of espionage or plotting against the state. But right now, the risks outweigh the rewards, so unless you have a burning desire to experience the joys of hyperinflation, food rationing, and the possibility of being thrown in a Venezuelan prison, it's best to admire Venezuela's beauty from afar. Let's see what's next. Yemen, where even the sun's afraid to shine. Our next stop is Yemen, a country located on the Arabian Peninsula that's been ravaged by one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, urging Americans to avoid all travel to Yemen. Yemen has been embroiled in a brutal civil war for years, with a complex web of warring factions, foreign intervention, and a humanitarian crisis that's difficult to comprehend. The U.S. government warns of the risk of kidnapping, detention, terrorist attacks, and being caught in the crossfire of a conflict that shows no signs of abating. Even experienced journalists and aid workers are strongly advised to stay away. The situation is dire, and the last thing you want is to become another statistic in this senseless conflict. So, unless you have a death wish or a superhero complex that rivals Superman's, Yemen is a destination best left off your travel bucket list. Let's move on to the next country. Next up we have Libya, a North African country with a rich history and a present that's about as predictable as a camel race through a sandstorm. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, urging Americans to avoid all travel to Libya. Libya has been plagued by instability and violence since the 2011 uprising that toppled Muammar Gaddafi. The country is awash in militias, armed groups, and two rival governments vying for control, making it a tinderbox waiting to ignite. The U.S. government warns of the risk of kidnapping, terrorism, crime, civil unrest, and being caught in the crossfire of a conflict that shows no signs of abating. Even if you're a seasoned traveler who thrives on adventure, Libya is not the place to test your luck. But right now, the risks far outweigh the rewards. So, unless you have a burning desire to experience the joys of political instability, armed conflict, and the possibility of being kidnapped by a rogue militia, it's best to admire Libya's beauty from afar. Let's move on to the next country. Somalia, where danger's always on the menu. Let's move on to Somalia, a country located in the Horn of Africa that's been synonymous with piracy, famine, and conflict for far too long. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, urging Americans to avoid all travel to Somalia. Somalia has been grappling with a complex and brutal civil war for decades, with the Al-Shabaab terrorist group controlling large swaths of the country. The government is weak, the security situation is volatile, and the humanitarian crisis is one of the worst in the world. The U.S. government warns of the risk of kidnapping, terrorism, crime, civil unrest, and being caught in the crossfire of a conflict that shows no signs of abating. Even experienced journalists and aid workers who are usually drawn to these kinds of hotspots are strongly advised to stay away. So, unless you have a death wish or a superhero complex that rivals Wonder Woman's, Somalia is a destination best left off your travel bucket list. Let's move on to the next country. Afghanistan. A land scarred, a future uncertain. Our next stop is Afghanistan, a country that's been at the heart of global conflict for decades. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, urging Americans to avoid all travel to Afghanistan. Following the withdrawal of U.S. troops and the Taliban's swift takeover, Afghanistan's future remains uncertain. The security situation is volatile, the humanitarian crisis is dire, and human rights, particularly for women and girls, are under threat. The U.S. government warns of the risk of terrorism, kidnapping, civil unrest, and being caught in the crossfire of a conflict that shows no signs of abating. Even experienced journalists and aid workers are strongly advised to stay away. So unless you have a death wish or a superhero complex that rivals Captain America's, Afghanistan is a destination best left off your travel bucket list. Let's move on to the next country. Belarus, Europe's last dictatorship, tourists not welcome. Last but not least, we have Belarus, a country often referred to as Europe's last dictatorship. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, urging Americans to avoid all travel to Belarus. Belarus has been ruled with an iron fist by Alexander Lukashenko for nearly 3 decades, and his regime is notorious for its human rights abuses, crackdown on dissent, and suppression of free speech. The U.S. government warns of the risk of arbitrary detention, harassment, and the possibility of being caught in the crossfire of a government crackdown. Belarus has also been a key ally of Russia in its war against Ukraine, further escalating tensions with the West. But right now the risks of visiting far outweigh the rewards. So unless you have a burning desire to experience the joys of authoritarian rule, state-sponsored propaganda, and the possibility of ending up in a Belarusian prison, it's best to admire Belarus's beauty from afar. Let's wrap this up. Stay safe, stay informed, keep exploring. Thanks for watching. We know it's a bummer that these 10 countries are off limits for now, but hey, at least you didn't book a non-refundable flight and find out the hard way. Remember, the world is a constantly changing place, and travel restrictions can change as quickly as the price of airline baggage fees. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates on travel restrictions and global news. Stay safe and informed, and keep exploring our amazing planet responsibly.